I'm just going to start recording. All right, welcome everyone. I'm going to get started in just a moment. All right, welcome. Good morning. My name is Ariel Sullivan. I am facilitating this meeting today along with Linda Norris-Walt, and we are happy to be here to be understanding the issues across the compostable system, the U.S. compostable system. This is Discovery Workshop number 6 out of 13. We have added one for compost end users, given our discovery process. And this compostables discovery workshop is focused on material suppliers and material designers. And I'm going to just share a little bit of background on the effort. I'm sure many of you are returning participants and you have heard this before, but for those who may be new to the conversation, welcome. If you are not on mute, please put yourself on mute. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Improving the Circularity of Compostables and Compost initiative. So this is a 2-year effort to engage key players from across the U.S. compostable system in co-creating a future state and a future system that's effective and that improves the effectiveness of all stakeholders involved, quite frankly. So we are imagining a future where there is cohesive and seamless collaboration across all organizations. And this is a strategic planning effort. So our intention is to create a shared vision and common purpose with clear action plans based on the work everyone is willing to do together. So there is an event coming up in September in Denver, and 200 stakeholders from 12 different stakeholder groups are going to be invited to this in-person collaborative 3-day process for on strategic
Hey, it's me
planning.
again.
Oh, hi, Glenn. I'm going to mute you. So yes, we're doing strategic planning together in person with a large group of people. And as leading up to that, we have engaged a steering committee of 30 people from 26 different organizations who meet every 2 weeks, who help inform who needs to be at the table for these conversations. So everybody on this slide is a steering committee member. We have been through a lot of really focusing conversations on what are we really trying to accomplish and getting really clear on that, what's in scope, what's out of scope, because it's a lot is at stake to bring 200 people across the country for 3 days. And so we have had a lot of conversations on our intention for this and our purpose for this. And we've also gone through the process of identifying the first 200 people. So we are in the process of extending invitations to those first 200. And there is a wait list. So I will say, we are.
No, I think that's good for now.
Okay, please put yourself on mute if you're not on mute. If you're interested in coming to the event, I'm going to put a wait list form into the chat right now, because we are kind of gathering a sense of interest from people for if there is space that opens up. who might want to come. And that, of course, we look at a priority based on what stakeholder groups are not well represented yet. And so we're kind of at the first point in the process now where we're opening that up to get a sense of like, where is their interest in energy? And of course, it's dependent on the space that we have, as there's only 200 spots. In addition, I wanted to share another form. This is a commitment form, and this is around shared funding and kind of a collaborative approach to being a shared funder and a circularity partner. And so if that's something that you're interested in, like take a look at the form, fill it out. We have funded this. What's been very interesting and innovative about this is that there's no one sponsor. It's actually coming from, it's co-sourced from within the system. And these are all of our circularity partners that have opted into that process, into that shared funding process. And those who have stars are on the steering committee. So it's a true effort of shared leadership. And as a steering committee, like we are discovering and learning what does shared leadership look like when you're working across boundaries and across sectors, because we are not in a hierarchical paradigm when it's multiple organizations across multiple systems. Right. So it's been a very interesting journey, and it's one of emergent leadership and one that is still finding itself. So it's really cool to kind of opt into this and to get involved because the event in September is just the beginning of this work. It's just the beginning of the focus areas of the work streams that are going to bring this industry together in a collaborative way. And the vision around this is, so as I said, it's a 2-year initiative. It's a whole system strategic planning and systems change effort focused on engaging pioneers from all parts of the system to come together to create a shared vision and collective roadmap towards optimizing the circular economy of the U.S. composting industry. This work centers, but it's not limited to food contact compostables. And we're using the future search model. And when we say circularity, we mean that the intentions of compostability are realized for compostable packaging and organic materials, and that the end products produced are able to be put back into meaningful use. These are our purpose statements. I will read them. So the first one, and this is what the steering committee has been working on to clarify and to become aligned around collectively, following that collective sense of energy of like what's most important to us. So we're wanting to design an inclusive whole system circularity model for the health of the composting industry that maximizes environmental benefits. We want to improve collaboration and coordination across all stakeholders in the system and improve information flow and to identify strategies to direct more food waste to commercial composting facilities that create value and confidence for all stakeholders in the compostable system. We want to shift stakeholder behavior to mitigate contamination and the cost of contamination linked to non-compostable food contact packaging. What we're doing today is the discovery workshops. So these are 90-minute sessions that happen every other week to be able to understand the opportunities and challenges that exist from these different stakeholder groups and really start to create those pathways of information flow and awareness and breaking down those silos and barriers in the industry. All of that data will be informed and used in the event in September as data points to help the system in the room understand more deeply the current state from a holistic perspective, because it is only from that holistic perspective are they able to like align on a future forward. We must have the full awareness of the whole before we start making decisions as a group. And so that's really what happens in the room, but it also happens leading up to being in the room. So we have all this useful data from these discovery workshops, and these discovery workshops are free for anyone to attend. And I will also put the form in the chat as well. We have had, I think we have over 200 signups for these calls, and they are made available on our YouTube channel afterwards. So if you have not checked out past sessions, if you are late to the party and you want to see and hear what has happened so far, check out that YouTube channel. So it's Improving the Circularity. Should we have received confirmation of the future search planning meeting? If you have been invited, we are in the inviting process. Not everyone has been reached out to yet that has been invited, and that's what the steering committee is working on right now. But if you don't hear anything and you're interested, please put your name on the wait list, because we're bringing those names into the steering committee meeting the next time we meet to get a sense of like, okay, which groups are not well represented and who else do we want to engage? So hopefully that answers your question. The last thing I'm going to say is the facilitated strategic plan activation. So the future search is the methodology for strategic planning that happens in the room. It's a large group intervention that comes from the field of organization development. It's been used for like 30, 40 years all over the world. That is getting us to a place of clarity on having a rough draft of a plan. And then like the year post that, it's implementation of that plan and really facilitating the activation of it. So the end is the beginning, really. All right, and the Discovery Workshop series. So we are here at number 7, or we're here at number 6. And we've just added number 8, which is compost end users, because we feel like that's been a conversation that's come up, which is important in terms of what is happening with all this compost that we're creating. And here's a schedule of these. We send out the confirmation email usually within a week of the actual series. So just know that it's kind of a just in time. It's like a week, maybe to 10 days before, like you should see that pop up on your calendar, but they're every other week on Thursdays for the most part until September. Okay, here we are to the moment you've all been waiting for. So I'm happy to say we have a really nice lineup of panelists who have been very gracious to offer their time and their wisdom for us today. We have Brad Rogers, VP of Technology at Danimer Scientific, Dan Martins, VP of North America, Novamont, by proxy today, writing in some responses. Sam Wortman, CEO of Sage Eco Innovations, LLC. Jeanette Hanna, Senior Advocacy and Sustainability Manager, Biopolymers North America, BASF, BASF. Kelly Williams, Managing Director at Earth First Films. Munir Izalahan. Munir, will you help me pronounce your last name?
Oh, sure. It's Munir Izalahan.
Munir Izalahan, thank you.
That's right.
Strategic Alliance Managers, Eastman. And Nicola Uhas, Global Technology Director, Sustainability, Sun Chemical. So just a really great breadth and depth of wisdom here. Thank you all for being here. What we are going to do is we have these 4 questions here, and we're going to start with the first question, and then we're going to hear from each of our panelists. Each panelist has about 3 minutes to answer that question. And Linda and I will be going back and forth, and I'm going to put a timer on as well. I'm going to put this question in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing also so we can see our panelists. And what I'd like to do is actually start with the question. I'd like to start with Brad. Brad, would you be willing to kick us off and sharing your response to this?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. So Danimer Scientific is a leading manufacturer of bio-based polymer materials that offer an end-of-life solution that would be compostable, industrial compostable, home compostable, biodegradable under other circumstances as well. We manufacture about roughly 30,000 metric tons of PHA today. We're one of the largest manufacturers of PHA in the world today. Globally, there's roughly less than 100,000 metric tons of PHA being produced. And then to put that into context with the global world of bio-based, biodegradable polymers, I estimate there's somewhere around south of 500,000 metric tons. So it seems like big numbers, but when you compare that to traditional petroleum-based conventional polymers that are being produced, it's less than 1% of the overall global polymer production. So today these materials are very small by comparison to traditional materials. A little bit about some of our customers and how we move with materials. We've got several customers that are purchasing regularly a broad range of materials, everything from box quantities of materials to truckload quantities of materials, multiple truckloads a month type of materials. We have applications that people are utilizing our materials in across food service items, food packaging items, other kind of specialty niche items as well. But we service a broad range of processes, everything from film production, injection molding, extrusion applications. Think of cutlery, straws, plates, cups, those types of things. Extrusion coating for paper. Those are all application areas that we service with our materials. We have customers that are starting to grow fairly significantly across North America and somewhat globally as well. Just to give you an example, we have one of our bigger customers is distributing in over 460 channels across North America. So products are out there in the marketplace broadly, and you can find these materials kind of readily in some places, and I think it's growing, but it's still very much in the early phases of adoption across many of these applications.
Great. Thank you, Brad.
Sure thing.
I'm going to share Dan's response. Dan says Novamont is a leading supplier of compostable resins used primarily for film applications. And I'm going to move us over to Sam Wortman from Sage Eco Innovations. Welcome.
Great. Thanks for having me. So yeah, I'm Sam Wortman, and at Sage Eco Innovations, we've developed a product family that we call Root Through, which are 100% bio-based, value-added materials for gardeners, farmers, and foresters. So we're kind of providing the non-food contact perspective today. We're also a small startup company, only about 18 months into our venture. And we've recently commercialized our first 3 products, the Root Through Weed Barrier, Max Weed Barrier, and then a Protect Plant Cover. And we market those through Amazon. So we've been selling those for about a month. We've sold about 2 tons, so not 100,000 metric tons of PHA polymer like was previously discussed. But our products are mostly a composite of craft paper and non-woven PLA. And so we're developing new products all the time and continuing to try to scale our operation. So yeah, really here just to try to provide some of that alternative perspective of scale and a different industry.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to bring in now Jeanette.
Hi, good morning. I'm Jeanette Hanna from BASF. At BASF, our purpose is we create chemistry for a sustainable future. And in our biopolymers business, we make certified compostable and certified soil biodegradable biopolymers based on PBAT, which is the product we manufacture. PBAT is a polyester like many other compostable polymers, and is often used in combination with other compostable polymers. These products can be used in a wide range of applications where conventional plastics are already used, including a range of paper coating applications, injection molding, thermoforming for rigid applications, and blown and cast films. These products are typically used in applications associated with food or food waste or in the agricultural sector. And it's my job to work on end-of-life topics for these materials to help ensure key elements of successful organics programs are in place and advocate for the appropriate role of compostables in these programs.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to go over to Kelly Williams.
Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Kelly Williams with Earth First Films. And Earth First Films, you might also know them as plastic suppliers. They got their start in distribution. So if you're focused on biomaterials and compostable packaging, plastic suppliers isn't exactly the best name. So we were rebranded into Earth First Films several years ago. What do? We have operations in Ohio and in Belgium, and we fabricate thin gauge biopolymer film. That's where we got our start. So we were one of the first to blow film out of PLA, go down to some really thin gauges. And I'd say over the last 6-7 years, we've probably fabricated 300 million pounds of PLA between us and our licensees worldwide. Unfortunately, not in compostable packaging where it should be used. So our focus today is still PLA, PHA, other biopolymer sealant films. And then more recently have taken a step even further to start integrating these materials into finished packaging solutions, including combinations with paper and other materials. So really trying to get into the designing the end use package in addition to just supplying one of the components of it.
Great. All right. And last but not least, Nicola.
Great, thank you. So introducing Sun Chemical, we are a part of the global DIC group, and we have a history that goes back over 2 centuries. Today, we are a leading global manufacturer of printing inks, coatings, adhesives, pigments, master batches, and polymers, highlighting just a few of our key product lines. We've got over 22,000 employees around the world, and over $8.5 billion in annual sales revenues. From a sustainability perspective, we do prioritize bringing enabling solutions to our various markets and customers, and a key market is the packaging segment. So our approach is to develop products or processes that can help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that can help to conserve virgin resources, and or that can help to reduce accumulation of waste. And we use what we call a 5R framework that guides our technology developments. So looking for ways that we can enable or allow reuse, reduce, renew, recycle, which includes composting and redesign, especially within that critical packaging market segment.
Wonderful. Awesome. Thank you very much. I'm going to go over to Linda, who's going to share the second question.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, coming to you from my USCC seat on the steering committee. Happy to help. The question number 2, tell us a little about how you intersect with the compostable packaging industry. What do you believe are the greatest opportunities created by designing and or supplying compostable materials for your customers? So we will start out as before with Brad.
Sorry, I just noticed I forgot Munir. Can we go back to Munir for the first question?
So sorry.
That's my fault.
It's all right. Yeah, I was actually waiting for the second question to talk about a high-level introduction of Eastman. So for those of you that don't know us, we are more than 100 years old, behind many products that improve people's everyday life. You probably interacted today with our products. You'll find Eastman products in cosmetics, medical devices, electronics, films, aviation, auto industry, and the list goes on. But Eastman is also innovating for sustainability. We want to enable circular economy models. For example, we are leading the industry in advanced recycling technology, and we are now able to convert hard to recycle and landfill bound material back to useful product through our molecular recycling technology. We have also committed to leverage our cellulosic stream, and that's the reason that I am here, to develop compostable solution for the food service and food packaging space. We have now commercial solutions in straws, cutlery, protein trays to replace polystyrene, and also in paper coating. In my role is to work with the industry to enable that these materials deliver on their potential of addressing plastic waste and diverting food waste from landfill to composting. Thank you.
Munir, would you like to just roll into question number 2, since you had mentioned that at the beginning?
Excellent. All right, good. Remind me of the second question. I'm sorry, I forgot.
Absolutely. How do you intersect with the compostable industry? What do you believe are the greatest opportunities created by designing and or supplying compostable materials to your customers?
Right. So when we say the compostable industry, I would imagine we mean the whole value chain, from converters down to compost buyers, and that's very important for us. So we interact with each value of the node, because as we innovate in this space, we got to make sure that we are creating value to change the behavior, to have that adoption. So for a converter, for example, that is going to make an article, we need to provide the value for them that is sometimes related to delivering a solution for their downstream customers. They could be brand. So for example, brands are being asked to provide sustainable solution for their customers, to have green, compostable, sometimes even mentioned as a want by their customers. Some converters, for example, are living under the pressure of regulation that is limiting their output. For example, bans on polystyrene, single-use article bans here and there. And the only access to the market is having a compostable material. So we have to work with them because we're providing a new material. It has its requirements. So, and this is typical for any business development case, making sure that the article will deliver on their expectation from a manufacturing standpoint. Working also downstreams for the brands, making sure that our products are hitting on the sustainability expectation from the beginning of life, from the performance for their consumers. When they're using a product based on our material, they're not compromising on the experience, and also on the end of life. And this is very important. This is why we are working in this kind of forum, to make sure that the compostable material get composted. Even going downstream, we work with the composters to validate everything that we have in terms of certification. We work with certifiers, third-party testing labs, very important to qualify our claims. And working with composters, you know, we want compostable material to be accepted. We want them to also provide value for composters through, you know, getting contracts with waste generators that have compostable material. So it's very important for us to work across the whole value chain, and very important that the value is created at each node.
Thank you. Okay, Brad, how about for Danimer Scientific?
Cool. Hey, first of all, I'd like to say that you know, it's great to be part of this group here of speakers. I mean, I see so much interaction and you know, cross collaboration that goes on amongst this group. So many of these materials complement one another and work very well with each other together. So that's one of the things that we try to do at Danimer is we work very closely with the packaging manufacturers and the food service products manufacturers as well. We want to develop products that are you know, certified industrial compostable as well as home compostable. You know, the brands that are ultimately want to use these materials and these products want to be able to make as, you know, broad claims as possible about the end of life and where these materials could potentially wind up and in a positive way versus you know, so many of the products just wind up going to landfill based on conventional materials. They want to be able to make a switch to materials that can offer a much better end of life solution. Is what most brand owners are looking for, and that's the reason why they're looking to switch to these types of materials and products. I believe that the value that these materials bring to the compost industry is that because these materials are so closely related to food, either food service or food packaging, they're going to bring you know, more food waste to the compost industry as a result. of using these types of materials that are going to come in close contact with the food items, and then wind up delivering more organic materials that composters hopefully are going to be desirable of.
Thank you. And Sam, what is the intersection and the opportunities for you?
Yeah, so we intersect with the compost industry in that we're seeking certification in the process of getting CMA and BPI certification for our products. And one unique thing about our products is, in particular, the root through weed barrier, which is our first commercialized product, is that it was designed for plants to be seeded on top of and grow through the product. And the way that that works is it actually requires the use of compost. So we actually put compost on top of that weed barrier. And then in that way, our customers use compost to grow their plants in our weed barrier. And then our customers then compost their spent weed barrier at a commercial composting facility and then return for more compost the next year to continue growing in our product. And so we're piloting that circular composting strategy in Minnesota with Frogtown Farms and Specialized Environmental Technologies, where Frogtown is getting compost from set, and then they will be taking their material there at the end of the season to have it composted. And then, I see our greatest opportunity in designing compostable materials for our customers is really that it adds value and credibility to our 100% bio-based claims. Because, people are seeking plastic alternatives, but if it ends up in a landfill end of life, a lot of that value proposition is lost. And so, in addition, having compostable products as opposed to biodegradable in soil, for us, that's important because our compostable products are more durable than biodegradable in soil products, and they perform similar to petroleum-based polymers. They can be easily removed from the field at the end of the season because of that added durability, and don't pollute the soil with the buildup of residues that can sometimes happen with soil biodegradable polymers. And for us, it opens up pathways for certified organic farmers in the US to use our products. So that's what I have.
Thank you. Who knew compost use was going to come up today? Okay, how about Jeanette?
Yeah, thank you. I think the most important point to make about certified compostable products is that they've been shown to be a tool for helping to support food waste diversion at scale. So, that's really our interest, is how do we move massive amounts of food waste from landfill and in some cases incineration into organics, recycling programs, in particular composting. So as an example, we, like many others and many that I see on the call today, have spent quite a lot of time, for example, working with closed loop venues to show this value and to show, more importantly, how a successful program might work. The benefit of working in a venue in particular is that a large volume of food waste is created there, and the inputs to the venue can be controlled. And for us, this is really a model for a well-designed system, which ideally can be translated to a larger scale. And the key elements include the consumers, the people putting products in the waste bin, have limited choices, first of all, on the products they have in hand to start. They have limited choices for which bin to use. And there's education, communications that are prominently communicated, either ideally, in these cases, posted physically, which is one way, but the education piece is fully covered and can be repeated and communicated in several different manners. So the final element of these closed loop venues that's really important is that there's feedback loops throughout the system for each of the participants involved. So for us, in detail, if we kind of look at some of these key elements that you might find, right? So in particular, in a venue, the waste stream can be sorted before it leaves the site, which allows for monitoring and trends within that waste generation space. And then secondly, with the composters getting an entire truckload from one place, so they know if there's an issue with it, where it came from, and they can reach out and have support in solving that problem. And I think as we look at larger scale programs, right, frequently these are the kinds of gaps that we aren't covering quite as readily, and I think are really important. And then additionally, right, within a venue, as in any community, right, there are multiple stakeholders relevant to the success of the programs. There definitely needs to be some high level executive commitment in a venue case, which of course you can translate to larger scale in a municipality or a county or something of that nature, for the purpose of having buy-in from the overall organization. The food service vendors, for example, are responsible for the sourcing of the proper products, and the housekeeping team is responsible then for managing waste inside the venue. So with all of those key elements, I guess I just want to highlight really, you know, the greatest benefit of these products can be realized when the system around it is working well and all the stakeholders are connected.
Great, thank you. I did miss mentioning that Dan Martins made a contribution. He couldn't be here today, but I put that in the chat for Novamont's answer to this question. So Kelly, how about Earth First Films? I think you hinted in your introduction, perhaps some of the intersection and the benefits.
Yeah, we historically have always intersected with what we would call packaging converters, which is basically the manufacturers, the people that are printing and making flexible packaging. So when I speak specifically about laminated flexible packaging, because today you've got, you know, polyesters, polypropylenes, adhesives, polyethylene sealants, sometimes other materials inside that. So what puts the printed packaged consumer good on the shelf today that's from the fossil-based plastics is a complex structure. So we intersect with that conventional way that it's done. What we're trying to do now is actually build the finished solutions to accelerate that adoption, because so when I read this, the greatest opportunities created by designing and or supplying compostable materials to your customers. So created from what, for what, and supplied how. That's one of the challenge points in the opportunities, is what we're comparing it to. So today you've got packaging that we can all say is largely over-engineered. You know, a bag of chips has no business going to Mars and back and still being fresh. So it's a tough place for brands to be, because they don't know what's good enough. They only know what they're currently getting. So a lot of that work has been going on and continues to go on, but that helps at least tell you what the package performance needs to be. But then there's the, what do I build it from? And that's where we're getting more and more materials that we can start formulating with. But who's doing that formulating? Who's putting these combinations together? And how do you do it in a way that a brand accepts the higher price, but feels comfortable that the supply chain is there for them in a reliable way? So I think some of the opportunities is really on the material side, being able to take new materials and get them in a space that we can formulate with them. One of the challenges there is we've become bigger. Our chemical companies are more global, they're bigger. We've kind of gotten a little bit, I'm not going to say lazy, but we've gotten into a nice rhythm with these convenient fossil-derived molecules that we can valorize into acrylics and coatings and adhesives and new polymers. So if we have to say we can't continue to do that anymore, we have to start designing new molecules from bio-based sources. That's a tough thing to do, because we're used to formulating with somebody that comes in and slides a convenient menu across the table with prices, drum pricing, delivery times. We've conveniently mechanized formulating packaging solutions. And now we're saying we have to go find these molecules from nature and turn them into something. And then we get into another quagmire, because we look at how do we do that at this big scale, like a single plant that does tens of millions of pounds, where maybe that's not the right answer either. So looking more at how do we make these materials to make packaging from a more distributed manufacturing basis, that we make what we need and can keep it into some sort of an organic loop. So I think the opportunities are abundant on the material side, as so long as we have a way that we can shepherd it through the development process to answer some key things. Does it work? Does it work depends on separating the needs of packaging from the requirements of packaging. The needs of packaging are pretty much not going to change. The requirements absolutely will change. They always do. But right now, there's certain equipment that's running fossil-based plastics that we have to conform to. There's certain expectations of shelf life and different. So those are all requirements that can change with time. But right now, those are the requirements we have to meet. So it is a dynamic space, but I think the opportunity really is, how do you bring new materials through the development place and then get them onto machines to test them. And part of that development, at least in flexible packaging, is there's not a lot of application development still being done. It's almost like the R in R&D, it's become a little lowercase r at a smaller font. It's all about development, not true research. So we're kind of in a place where, you know, it's hard to do really out of the box design work because we're not set up to do that. So I think that's where some of the opportunities are.
Thank you. Nicola, your intersections and opportunities.
Right. So Sun Chemicals' intersection with the compostables market is very broad. As I mentioned earlier, we have prioritized or integrated the composting and compostable packaging as part of our sustainability strategy. And we have developed a wide range of things like inks, overprint varnishes, coatings and adhesives, including functional barrier coatings and adhesives, as well as primers that are being used in and that are actually enabling compostable packaging today. So we have the broadest global range of compost certified inks, and we're also continuing to expand our certified materials in the coatings and adhesives area as well. These items may be a small part of the package. For example, they're typically applied at just a few percent, often below 1%, sometimes up to 3 to 7. But our products are very important for the structural integrity, application performance, communication of product and brand identity and on-shelf differentiation, and as well as communication of required information on the package, like contents, use, handling and restrictions. So the items that Sun Chemicals supplies can contribute to higher performing, higher value, and more efficient packaging designs. So we see that as a clear opportunity. Even being able to enhance shelf life, which can reduce food waste. And that's obviously a huge driver from an environmental as well as social aspect.
Thank you. Thank you all. Back to you, Ariel.
Great. I'm wondering, there was a question in the chat that we will come back to if we have time after we go through the third and the fourth question. So I'm going to put the third question in the chat right now. And if we can start with Brad.
All right, so you know, probably part of the greatest challenges that you know, these new materials face is just, you know, designing these materials so that they and working with these materials, engineering these materials so that they will, you know, match the incumbent traditional plastics polymer performance, you know, for the particular application, whether that be film or injection molding or thermoforming applications. Just meeting those performance expectations is very critical. You know, I know that we've spent a tremendous amount of time within our organization and with our customers to you know, find the right polymer formulations, you know, that will, you know, meet those performance expectations, as well as meeting the end of life expectations that you know, ultimately the brands or the consumer is looking for with these particular products. So you've got to worry about, you know, all that front end performance as well as the end of life expectations, and making sure those two, you know, don't become compromised. That's the engineering part. We work very closely on overcoming that. On the, you know, on the, I guess the total value chain, you know, of the compost industry, you know, I think the challenges that we face there are around, you know, just confusing information, misinformation, bad information, you know, seeping into people's, you know, language and in their rhetoric that are being thrown around. You know, these materials have to go through a tremendous amount of you know, certifying, testing processes that are then certified by third parties. to be able to make a claim that it is industrial compostable. And you've got well-respected organizations like BPI and TUV who are kind of overseeing that certification process, and I've put it in a very rigorous process for evaluating these materials. And so you go through all that, and then somehow, people in the value chain, some come back and say, well, that doesn't really work. And you just get this misinformation. So battling that is always part of the challenges that we face with being able to introduce these materials. That confusion then can slow down, brand owners' adoption of these materials and use of these materials, because, they hear things, and hearsay can then sometimes become, truths because they heard it from someplace or they read it someplace. And it's just, that battling that misinformation is always a challenge. So I think, working with these third-party certifiers is very, very critical. That will validate that our materials are absolutely, industrial compostable or home compostable, whatever type of end-of-life claim you're going to put onto that package. Getting that true validation by a third party, I think, is very critical. And then trust in that validation is another part of the process that people just have to be able to accept. It's just not practical to go and work with every single individual compost facility across the country to validate that your material will work there. So finding a way to validate your material universally and have it being accepted across the the compost value chain, I think is very important. And I think that's one of the challenges that we make, that this group is working against, so that we can come up with pathways by which if you have a certified compostable product, it gets accepted broadly across North America and other places around the world, so that it actually does work and then gets accepted and then used, and then remove that confusion out of the industry, I think is very, very important. I've done a lot of work. Danimer's worked very closely in implementing products into the marketplace, for commercial applications that are ongoing today. But we also have done a lot of introductory products for regional, short-term launches, just to test and learn how these products work. And in those particular situations, we work very closely with maybe a local composter to show that and to demonstrate that your products actually do work, and everybody's happy in that situation. But building on that and making that become universally accepted across the entire continent and across all the composters, I think is something that needs to be well communicated and accepted.
Thank you, Brad. Let's go over to Sam.
Okay. All right. So question 3, for us, top of mind is the cost of biopolymers and those compostable polymers compared to petroleum-based. So, we're in an industry where most of our end users, we're trying to convert them from petroleum-based polymers, products using petroleum-based polymers. So we really focus on trying to create value-added products. Certainly, we want to capture people who are interested in plastic alternatives. But given the cost of those polymers, we need to find value add beyond just the compostability aspect. Another challenge for us is just communicating, as was previously mentioned, communicating those differences in certifications, differences in bio-based content versus biodegradable in soil, home compostable, commercially compostable. That's an ongoing challenge. A customer, for example, who incorrectly identifies our product as biodegradable in soil because they see our bio-based certifications is not going to be very happy, because PLA in the form we use it is not biodegradable in soil, so it will accumulate. So making sure we communicate that end-of-life pathway is really important for us with regards to the composting industry. Another challenge, there's currently no financial incentive for a customer to choose commercial composting instead of landfilling as an end-of-life pathway. For our customers or any gardener or farmer that's using plastic mulches and films. And so in many cases, it's actually more convenient or affordable to choose a landfill over a commercial compost facility. And then another challenge is just availability and access to commercial compost facilities. It's particularly limited in some states and in rural areas where, for example, farmers would be using these products. And then also, some commercial composters, do not want or passionately reject bioplastic products, primarily because of bad actors upstream, that contaminate those feedstocks. And so that kind of gets back to this communication issue and upstream in the value chain.
Great, thanks, Sam. And I'm just going to read Dan's response. Dan also mentioned that cost and performance has been an issue. And let's go over to Jeanette.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge that we face is really the challenge of our continent, frankly, in North America. And that's the lack of robust and sustainable, well-designed composting programs that exist at large scale for post-consumer food waste, right? This is something we just don't have right now. And compostable products in particular are a piece of that. But I would say, keeping the focus on that high level goal of getting the organics out of landfill and into composting facilities is really, really the main piece. One of the challenges I think others have raised, right, is because programs are designed locally, many of them as they roll out are developing differently. They're not uniform. There are local conditions of various types, right, that affect that, which is fine. But because of that, right, it's almost like reinventing the wheel in many different flavors. And so it's easy for pieces of programs and full systems to go missing. And that leads to challenges for everyone, in particular the downstream participants, the hauler, the composter, and even the compost user. And so, just want to highlight the challenge associated with putting a whole new stream into existing waste frameworks, waste contracts, waste relationships that have existed for decades and centuries in some areas that are really designed for other materials, right? So, I mean, it's the underlying space that's the main issue. As it really relates to compostables, I would also flag the proliferation of misinformation and disinformation we've seen in past years. That's really been a distraction, and it makes us look backward instead of looking forward. And so I think one of the things we need to focus on, as we do maybe with all of our information intake on any topic, is to be really critical and discerning of the things that we read. And in particular, if claims are being made and of any type, right, that are made without supporting evidence and or without transparency around key elements that support that claim, I think those are things that we need to be really mindful of in our own minds. And it's a challenge, right? Because none of us are experts in everything. But if we're looking maybe for some of those fundamental key things, we can be aware that maybe there's another side, right? When information is missing, maybe there's another side, and maybe there's something more to be learned. So I would point to this need for a single point of truth to really support growth of our organics diversion industry altogether, and just highlight there was a convening that many folks participated in some years ago. It was during COVID. It was supported by, I think, BPI and BioCycle, looking to frame up kind of like, well, just the baseline of what can we all agree on and where do we all agree we want to go. And I think, attempts like that, discussions like these are really important for making sure that we're focusing on things that drive us forward rather than looking at things that take us backward.
Thank you, Jeanette. Kelly?
This question probably could be a 90-minute session in and of itself. The greatest challenges. So for us, what we perceive as greatest challenge, like there's a lot of doubt, but just in the place of getting brands to want it, to accept it, I'm going to deviate a little bit. Price matters, but I think let's put price into perspective a little bit on the packaging side. You have find the dichotomies. If you find the dichotomy in the situation, you can find the lever. So we have some dichotomies here. You've got legacy brands that are getting bigger through acquisition, but it's not stopping the fact that there's 25,000 what we call SMBs, small, medium-sized brand businesses that just keep coming in. So that big demographic of brands have a different checklist of what they're looking for that represents who they are and their brand identity. Compostable packaging is actually something that they want. But if you come to me and you try to convince me, I'll be like, okay, so you're telling me I'm going to pay 2 or 3 times more, and it may not work technically. It may not keep my product fresh long enough, what I'm used to, and I may have some supply chain challenges with it. Okay, sign me up. So I think there's an opportunity here to take these things that we know are working and get them into those brands. But we also have consolidation on the packaging side. So in 2012, 17 converters in North America made up 64% of the market for flexible packaging. Today, that number is a lot lower. It's closer to 10 and it's 86%. And it's not that they're unable to innovate, but they have to innovate across 4 different areas: conventional plastics, recyclable plastics, post-consumer content maximization. And when it comes to compostables, they do one and done R&D. They take the best idea and they try it, and maybe 6 months later, you learn something from why someone said it didn't work. So I think some of the challenge is actually finding those dichotomies that are sitting in there. I think the other challenge, and I think we're sensing that there's a realization with some larger brands that mechanical recycling of thin gauge flexible packaging is problematic. If we can say anything else, it's problematic. It's got food contamination. It takes, don't quote me on the number, but I think it's 250,000 candy bar wrappers to get 1 ton of usable material. So it's a lot to get a little bit of mass. You have to really get a lot of it to do something. And it's not actually recycling. A granola bar wrapper is not going to become another granola bar wrapper. It's going to go into park benches and playgrounds. So let's call it repurposing, because that's what it is, but you need a mass to repurpose. And we won't get into advanced recycling, but those are some of the challenges as we see it. But we think the rate of adoption is really the problem. And it's because no one's servicing those brands that are ready to do something today. And now that we do understand what barrier is good enough for a lot of those applications, I feel like that's one of the real needle movers to try to figure out how to drive adoption and build inertia. I think we need to say, look, the oil and gas industry doesn't want to see us be successful. By 2050, there will be more oil and gas used in plastics than in fuels. So I think there's a reality there that they're continue to misinformation and drive these things. But I think the other part with compostable packaging and its design is just looking at the truth around decarbonization. Governments around the world want to decarbonize industry. Governments around the world want to divert food out of landfills and to do something else with it. So I think the decarbonization thing and the emissions, scope 3 emissions are going to drive. So I think there's other things that are going to drive it, despite what the legislation is saying, which is another problem, is interpreting what that looks like. But I will tell you, brands are ready to adopt compostable packaging, and they're doing it because of litter. It's the only option that designs for human entropy, meaning it's not going to make it where it's supposed to go. And so I think when we say home compostable, when we keep hearing that over and over, I want home compostable, I think it's not even a feint. I think it's a loud cry to say, I need it to not be litter. I need it to be taken back by nature. And we want it to be home compostable because there's no faith that the system will collect it. So I think those are the greatest challenges as we see it.
Great, thank you, Kelly. It's super insightful. I'm going to shift over to Munir.
All right. So, sorry, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, everything that was said, the most part, I totally agree with. So I don't think I have a lot to add. so from the challenge standpoint, so definitely as innovators, we have to invest a lot of time and money to develop those solutions with the mindset that those solutions will stick. So that's the risk that is associated with this kind of business. And then we have to check all the boxes with our vision on what success look like. But the moment that you start working with downstream participant, then you got to make sure that they are willing to do the same thing, meaning they have to go through the certification, they have to go through the validation, they have to make the changes that are required for that material to run in their asset. So that sometimes could be challenging because it's time and cost. Then with the brands, especially when it comes to, like Kelly, what you were saying, I mean, they want. Everybody has a lot of good ideas of what a solution should be doing. And that's where we have that connect, especially in a space where the infrastructure is not as big as we want.
Hey, Munir, you're breaking up just a little bit. I don't know if it's just me. Maybe slow down a little bit, and maybe that will help with the connection.
Okay. So I was talking about the rate of adoption basically. So the big question remain: are downstream customers using compostable material as a core choice, or is it opportunistic just to fit for some regulation in some region? And this is the challenge that we are seeing, and how the compostable material are going to grow. So this is what we are expecting. Regulations will be in favor of compostable material adoption, and therefore we will have a lot of more buy-in in this space. Yeah, those are the kind of issues that I think the whole industry is sharing. Definitely, it's around how long it takes, from that innovation standpoint. That sometimes make a little bit people sometimes uncomfortable for what is required to do the right thing.
Great, thank you so much. Could hear you perfectly at the end there. So
okay, good.
Nicola.
So we will repeat some of what's been said, but perhaps that's helpful, because if you hear the same messages repeatedly from different participants in the value chain, then there is credibility for those messages. So we do see a significant challenge in that performance cost trade-off that's already been mentioned several times. Ultimately, consumers want more sustainable, perhaps compostable packaging formats, but they're not willing to give up the current convenience of today's packaging. So shelf life needs to be the same, on-the-go use, no need for refrigeration, etc. And they don't want to pay more for the product either. So cost, it is always an issue. Let's be realistic. This can pose a major challenge on the compostable supply chain, because many of the raw materials that allow for composting can be either new or niche items that are not yet available in large and fully scaled commercial volumes. So they're not available at cost neutrality to traditional materials, and cost will be an issue during the market transition period. Raw material availability overall can also be an issue. So truly compostable raw materials that deliver the expected levels of performance may not be available across key material categories. For example, in our business, standard pigments are not compostable, and alternatives to those standard pigments, colorants that provide the same level of performance and color, they simply aren't available yet. So development and transition to new materials will take time, will take investment, and we expect that time and investment will be well spent so that we can bring new and more sustainable packaging formats to the market, but we have to understand that there will be time and investment. And I'll say one other key challenge that hasn't been mentioned yet is regulatory and legislative developments and how they'll drive infrastructure development, access, and availability to support growth of the compostables market. So the legislative trends that we see in Europe, for example, that are restricting allowable compostable items, and the current lack of clarity in some of the extended producer responsibility legislation being drafted in the US, what's passed in California, those will not be helpful. So those are some of the challenges that we see.
Thanks, Nicola. Linda, take us home with the last question.
Yes, actually, Nicola, you set us up just right for the last question for everyone, which is what should other stakeholders in the supply chain, the solid waste management system, and regulators take into consideration when problem solving around these issues? What would be the most helpful? And Ariel, I guess we could keep the spotlight on Nicola. She's started to introduce this topic. I don't know if you want to add something else to that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when we looked at this question, we would say that certainly based on the challenges that were mentioned, it should be clear that there is a transition period. And there will be a significant change in component materials and technology adoption that will be needed. And this shift has and will continue to take time and will continue to take investment. So we as an organization are dedicated to supporting the research and development that will be needed to bring truly compostable items. And the whole supply chain has to recognize that and support the transition. So certification standards that are changing without recognizing the development cycle and the investments needed and material challenges, and that restrict certified items to an impractical degree, for example, not allowing for security of supply, they will hamper rather than support innovation in the compostable space. And as was already referenced by others in the discussion earlier, when even certified materials are not accepted by the composting industry, that will further stifle the innovation that's needed towards bringing new and better solutions. So this is where we as an overall supply chain, including obviously really key, the composters as a participant in that chain, will need to work together to work through these challenges.
Absolutely. Thank you. Let's swing over to Brad and stakeholders and problem solving.
Hey, I'll just echo some of the things that Nicola highlighted. Absolutely, certifications have got to be trusted and accepted broadly. You know, and that process of certifying your material for industrial compostability is quite rigorous, and people need to understand that it involves multiple legs. It's not just you know, demonstrating that the material, you know, disintegrates, but it also is demonstrating that your material actually biodegrades and into CO2 and water, which is what the definition of biodegradation is. It also takes into account any contaminants or any additives that may be in your particular product. If there's any residuals left over, they have to be safe for the soil and not be a poison or a negative to the environment. So there's a tremendous amount of rigor that goes into that testing process. So when you do pass certification, you've checked off all those boxes for, you know, biodegradability, disintegration, as well as potential contamination to the soil. So you know, we need to be able to make sure that people are, you know, aware of that and are trusting that certification. Now, if that certification process needs to be modified so that it more closely matches, you know, what's actually going on in the industry, okay, well, so be it. Let's collectively work on that and make sure that we're getting those test parameters, you know, to match what's going, you know, what does go on in the industry, and that the industry is also performing, you know, proper composting processes. The other thing that I think is a challenge and an issue here is you know, while you're transitioning from, you know, traditional materials to these, you know, new materials that are compostable and that will bring, you know, more food waste to the compost facilities. I mean, there's just going to be that turmoil time in that transition where contamination is going to happen, and there just has to be a way to fight through that and to figure out a way to manage through that. And that contamination is going to happen, you know, with or without compostable packaging materials. You know, consumers are just, their consumers are consumers. They oftentimes mean well and or just are ignorant to the what needs to go into what bin. But in the process, things that shouldn't wind up in a compost facility, will inadvertently wind up there until such a time, at a future state that, everything that is properly compostable, is put into the right place, and things that are recyclable are put into the right place. And then, the last little bit of things that just cannot be, recycled or composted wind up in a landfill. With that, I think, a way to help foster this along and to help, bring the industry forward, and manage the cost of that transition period. I'm actually a big fan of EPR, properly managed EPR programs, so that the true cost to society is being valued and applied to the right producer that is putting the material into the marketplace, and ultimately for the consumer to have a way to get the right materials into their hands. EPR, if it's properly managed, will bring funding to the entire value chain to manage these materials. Over the past few decades, we've seen how EPR in Europe, for instance, has really driven the recycling industry, because it's so much of the EPR is focused on just recycling only. What you're seeing with some of the EPR legislation that's coming out of the United States, I think, is much more progressive. You're seeing not only recycling as an end-of-life scenario, but you're seeing composting come up. So getting that language right, and there's a lot of confusion right now that's in that process that needs to be worked out. But I'm an optimistic person that if we can figure out a way to get that language right, get the EPR bills appropriately managed, that there'll be funding for both recycling to improve their processes, as well as composting to improve their processes, to be able to collect these compostable materials and manage the materials appropriately, so that they do wind up in the compost facilities, and they get composted right, and the right materials are collected and sorted appropriately, and that contamination is minimized as a result. That's a very optimistic view on where we can be in society, but I got to believe that if we can manage these things appropriately, put the funding where it needs to go, that can help composters develop the right systems to sort out the materials appropriately, and then also encourage the right materials to wind up in the compost facilities. Then you'll bring a much better solution that society will benefit from, through that EPR legislation. But we got to get the language right, and we got to get the appropriate standards adopted and accepted into place.
Thank you, Brad.
Sure.
Dan Martins, again, had a contribution that I am posting in the chat for you to consider. And while that is going on, I'm going to swing us over to Sam from Root Through.
Great. Yeah, just I agree with everything that was said there, but I also think we need to find a way to keep commercial composters at the table during this transition period that was mentioned, right? Because it's going to be perhaps a lengthy transition period. And so, how do we do that? I think we need some innovation in technology for sorting, sieving, getting those contaminants, those plastics, petroleum-based plastics out of the compost, because during and even after the transition, I think that's going to continue to be an issue. So we might as well start tackling it. There's maybe other solutions of separating feedstock into low versus high risk feedstocks for different types of compost and different end use applications. But I think we need to start getting our heads around that while simultaneously working on rigorous certification, and those certifications might help us to think about how we partition into low versus high risk feedstocks. But contamination is probably not going away, so we need to figure out how to deal with it more economically at scale. And then I think we need some work on subsidies and incentives, maybe mandates for composting as an end-of-life pathway for organic waste. And I think with that will come some help and some money to increase infrastructure and access and reduce those costs. So most communities don't have curbside organic waste recycling, right? It's very commonplace for material recycling, right? But for organic waste recycling and composting, that's more the exception than the rule in most communities. And so something like that would go a long way. And then, I think this really, I agree with what Kelly said earlier about we need consumers to trust the end of life pathways for these products, whether it's a recycled product or a compostable product. So we need transparency, we need accountability in the system. So those are things that we should keep working on.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Jeanette, I know you have worked for years with many stakeholders. What do you think that they should be considering in solving these problems?
Yeah. Yeah, I think all of us, right, in this value chain, it's a very complicated space. I think we all need to consider what actions we take, how will it affect others? So that's always top of mind. And just point out, it's always possible also to reach out to people and ask for their experience. I know sometimes I feel cautious about interrupting someone's busy schedule to ask a question or see how things are going. And, it's not necessarily a problem, and it really helps all of us move forward. As others had mentioned, right, I mean, I would just point out again that while we have organics programs in place today, for the most part, they were not designed for post-consumer food waste. And so it's going to take some work and time, as others have noted, and we need to go step by step so to eliminate the risk and the pain on all parts, and also so that we can all see the benefits and the value that comes with transitioning into this new circular economy for organics. So it's a challenge, certainly in spaces where we don't have this umbrella, right? I mean, if I talked about the venues, of course, that is owned by somebody at some level. There's a responsible party. So certainly, I'm hopeful that well-designed EPR programs will maybe be some of that organizing structure that will help facilitate these kinds of dialogues in a way that are meaningful, environmentally impactful, and economically impactful for all involved. In the absence of that, certainly organics diversion mandates can, create markets for folks that work in end of life, for haulers and composters. If they know they have feedstocks coming in, then they can invest for the feedstocks they're going to be receiving. So in any case, I think I don't have any quick solutions. I will add just a quick story about a discussion I had years and years ago with someone from a municipality that had opened up a new facility, a composting facility. And I said, oh my gosh, like, how are you doing? How are things? And they said, well, they're fine. And I said, well, that's great. Like, how did you manage? And they said, well, we spent the time that we were building the facility educating the residents, so that by the time the facility was open, that they would know what they were supposed to put in each bin. They do use compostables there. They have successful programs, and really that education time before people were allowed to participate was probably on the order of 2 or 3 years. So I remain hopeful that it would be great if we could in 3 years find ways to really develop these programs at scale. So I leave that as a hopeful point that we can maybe consider.
I know a lot of composters that would love to have a training program for residents and businesses before they're allowed to send compostables and materials. Anyway, thank you for that. Okay, Kelly.
Yep. Great question. I love this one a lot. I think this particular panel of stakeholders represents those that need to bring new materials in, combining cellulosics, biopolymers. So the material part, I think, is our responsibility, and then designing those materials so that at some point in the future, composters can look at packaging as a bona fide source of carbon for as they redirect increasing amounts of food waste, which is a source of nitrogen. They can rely on packaging, but you can't rely on it today because there's just too much complexity in it, mixed materials. So either light format packaging eventually gets legislated to be compostable, because you're never going to take nut butter out of a sachet, Or at least maybe the industry can design packaging to not end up in two pieces when you open a pouch of something. So either design it for a fool's errand, which is reprocessing. If you took these plastic packaging and it's all polyethylene, so it's monolithic. If you were to just all of a sudden 90% reprocess that, you don't have much long to go before it all shuts down, because you can't reprocess plastic like that. Eventually, it's going to get repurposed. But where I think the other stakeholders that need to be thinking differently was a recent, so it's another story, it's a recent one. And it's Montgomery County in Ohio, which is where Dayton, Ohio is. And in that county, they looked at it as, we're a county that has citizens, and they estimated 180,000 families that are food shorted. So it started out with a food bank and properly collecting grocery store produce, and then they started growing food, and they started developing a compost facility. Now consumers participate $5 a month. They take their bucket of compost, they drop it off, they load it, they get a new bucket, and then they get that much compost back for their own gardening and everything else. But what's important about that is they're looking at how do we, so it's not about making compost, it's about feeding the shortfall of food for families. Compost becomes a piece of that. Again, I think the demand for compost is inevitable because it's our fastest way to turn dirt back into soil, to stop the erosion of land from climate disaster, rainfall. So there's all these reasons compost is inevitable. I think we're getting wrapped up a little bit with trying to make the package get composted, where right now we're just trying to prevent litter first, plug the hole in the boat, and now we can start dealing with the mass of these materials that are now a carbon source. But somehow we got to flip it from EPR penalties and cost centers to profit opportunities. So personally, I think physical compost facilities represent the footprint where our future distributed manufacturing of biorefinery sits. But I took this one county who has possibly the largest transfer station in the country, 600,000 tons a year in one transfer station in one county. That's 1.2 billion pounds of waste. Industrial and consumer, of which they did a study, 12 to 18% is food. So if I take that and say that if I took all that food waste and fermented it to lactic acid to not only make polylactic acid, but to make acrylics and these other materials that get valorized into the things we do every day today, that's 90 million pounds of lactic acid potential in one place that we can make polylactic acid in a distributed model. So somehow we have to start thinking about municipalities as little entrepreneurial business places. The problem is, and somebody who started out in public sector, started out public, went private, back to public, said that the pandemic has created such a shortfall of resources that you're going to have a hard time getting any municipality to take on anything that's going to cause them pain because they're understaffed. So somehow we have to turn this into an economic opportunity where that municipality sees it as a profit center for the county. So I think there's probably something there that we should be thinking about differently, but let's separate materials to design them as a carbon source for composting versus the management and the entropy around what we do with it after a consumer has it. I think if we separate those, we might see some common themes.
Thank you. So Munir, bring us on home on this question.
Okay.
What is your stakeholder perspective?
So, yeah, thank you. This is a very important question because the solution has to stick through the whole value chain for each and every stakeholder. I would propose that we need strategic choice. All those, especially the brands and all the downstream, let's say, players after the resin manufacturers, that they have a vision for the future when it comes to food service and food packaging. So we're not in a reactive mode, but planning for the future with the idea that we hope we'll get to one day, which will be mimicking what happens in nature, that everything that touches food should be compostable. This is just nature, and it will create a little bit of commonality to address this problem, especially when it comes to contamination. The reality also is that landfill is cheap. So landfilling is going to continue winning. So we need to find a way to create a value for landfillers to accept compostable material with the mindset of composting. There were discussion that the land is already there, the hauling, the knowledge of the industry is already there. So how can we make or help a landfiller to start composting? We should also work with composters for a motivation of change. What would make them accept more food waste? The majority of composters right now compost mainly yard waste. So there's a lot that we have to go over. Which is,
I think you're breaking up a little bit again, Munir.
Okay. So I think I don't think I'm going to add anything really new to what the team has said. So just to avoid any kind of discomfort for the audience. So that's basically some of the things that I think we should look at.
All right, thank you all.
Great. We have about 6 minutes left. And I'm wondering if we want to go back to the question, one of the questions in the chat. And it's around PFAS. So I'm just going to put this in here. And it's open to any of our panelists. We might not have time to hear from all of you, but if there are some initial responses, and then we can send a follow-up to get any additional if we run out of time.
I can start from the ink coating adhesive space that we have successfully eliminated PFAS already for the past year or more in our formulations that are going into especially packaging type of applications. So the PFAS typically comes in through waxes, and there are alternatives that do not contain that particular substance of concern. So from a perspective of the materials that we supply into the chain, they do not contain PFAS.
Nicola.
And I would just reiterate that, you know, the certification process that is required to to meet the standards for industrial compostability, take into account any other contaminants that would be detrimental to the soil. None of those can can be in that package because they would ultimately wind up in the soil. So that's being taken into account. So if the product and the package meets that certification, then they've screened it for that, and and that screening process involves a very comprehensive look at all the ingredients that go into that particular package, as well as a lab analysis of the resultant compost, against crops and crop growth.
Thanks, Brad. Anyone else like to chime in on this one? All right. If there are additional thoughts that any of our panelists have, you're welcome to provide them to me. There's a couple of questions that were specifically for like Sam or Hannah and Brad. I'm going to make sure that you get those so you can answer them and we can share them as a follow-up. But we are coming to the close of this discovery workshop. And I just wanted to thank everybody for, thank our panelists, especially, thank my facilitator, co-facilitator, Linda, and just wanted to share that our next discovery workshop is coming up on June 27th, and it is highlighting converters and end product producers. So this is kind of the other side of the packaging. We had two workshops for packaging, and then I think on the 11th is when we have compost end users discovery workshop. So please continue to share this RSVP link to those who you think might be interested. Stay tuned for the follow-up email. Definitely check out the rest of the YouTube links from past meetings if you have not seen them yet. And we look forward to seeing you at a future session. If you want to come to the meeting in September, please fill out the waitlist form. Thank you very much.